Welcome to Divine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax.
Hello and welcome to Divine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with Nora Devine. Nora has been a property tax attorney in private practice since 2005. She has developed a statewide practice in all jurisdictions in Illinois, and she represents all property classes. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Unlocking Illinois Property Tax Exemptions, what you need to know. Nora, it's great to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
All right, so let's get into it. What are some of the most common property tax exemptions available to Illinois residents, and who qualifies for each of them?
The general idea is if you live in your house and you own your house, you should benefit from some type of a homeowner's exemption, which gives you a little bit of a break on your tax bill. From state to state, the tax savings associated with these types of exemptions vary widely. In Illinois, in Cook County, maybe you'd save $1,000 because you have the homeowner's exemption, maybe less if you live in a place that has a lower tax rate. Outside of Cook County, maybe you'd save $700, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, just because you own the house and you live there. Compare that to places like Indiana, places like Florida, the homeowner's exemption can be extremely meaningful in those states. So in Illinois, you find that some people would rather take their homeowner's exemption in a state where the tax relief was more meaningful, such as Florida. And now the Cook County government does have the ability to do a nationwide search to check to see if you're receiving a homeowner's exemption in more than one location in the country. And there's some pretty draconian penalties in Cook County. They can go retroactive to recoup not only the tax savings that you didn't qualify for and took, but also penalties and interest in depending on how many different properties you were incorrectly claiming the exemption on, you can really end up with quite a bit of responsibility in the way of back payments. So this is just generally a tax break for homeowners who live in the property who are not taking a homeowner's exemption somewhere else in Illinois or somewhere else in the state. So that's the biggest one, is the general homestead exemption.
Are there any misconceptions about property tax exemptions in Illinois that you think that property owners should be aware of?
There's an interesting one that a lot of people don't know about. There is a provision of the property tax code that says that you can collect the general homestead exemption if it's a single family home and it's rented. So in other words, if you are the tenant and the lease says that you're responsible for tax, there is a provision in the statute that a lot of people don't know about where the tenant can actually gain the benefit of the homeowner's exemption. So that's one thing that people don't know. Another thing that people don't realize is that it's pretty easy to apply for the homeowner's exemption and receive it, especially if you live outside of Chicago, inside of Cook County. Outside of Chicago, they have all these local township assessors that are in the communities, and they're highly proficient at helping people make sure that these exemptions are in place. They can screen you for which exemptions you might qualify for and help you fill out the paperwork. And the other thing that a lot of people don't know is that you can go 3 years backwards in order to obtain the homeowner's exemptions. And this can be meaningful. Like I said, in Cook County, the general homestead exemption might be worth $1,000 a year. So if you can go back and regain 3 years, you would get about $3,000. Another thing that people don't know is that you do not need to hire an attorney to pursue this type of relief. There's a lot of mass mailers who are sending people mail saying, we know about tax relief, we know about a tax refund, we know about money that's sitting somewhere for you. And, if you pay us the low cost of 50%, we'll go find it for you and send it to you. And you don't need that. You don't need to pay those people. You don't need to pay anybody. My law firm doesn't even have a fee structure for retroactively achieving any homestead exemptions for people. We tell people the quickest way to go about it, depending on where they live. And we say, if you run into trouble, you'd give us a call. But this is not something that you need help with. This is the easiest process in property tax. You can just go straight into the assessor's office and show them your ID and show them a couple of utility bills, and they should be able to put them on for you.
Okay, that's a lot easier than people might think.
Yeah, and there's a lot of these. There's maybe 13 homeowners exemptions right now. And another thing that people don't realize is that different assessors might administer these programs in different ways. So your specific facts in a specific township in a specific county may qualify for a certain type of exemption, but the identical facts in a different township in a different county might not. And that's kind of frustrating. And some of the assessing officials have promoted some legislation over the years to kind of harmonize and to make it all uniform for the taxpayers as far as what these definitions mean and how these things are supposed to be applied.
Wouldn't that be nice? Uniformity in the terminology, right?
Yeah, uniformity is a big concept in property tax. You want things to be applied in a uniform way. Speaking of which, there's a homeowners exemption that is a home improvement exemption, which means if you put an addition on your house or if you do some type of a major upgrade, maybe you finish your basement, maybe you finish your attic, the $75,000 that you put in, the first $75,000 in value that you put in is supposed to be not taxed for 4 years. And so they call that the home improvement exemption. When the assessing officials gain access to the permit that is transmitted to them by the municipality, then they are automatically supposed to put that home improvement exemption in place. And then after 4 years, that would rotate off, and then it would be back to being assessed at full value.
Okay. And can you explain the difference between property tax exemption and property tax reduction? Sure.
The exemption means that, like, if your bill is this tall, the exemption is saying, this little part of the bill, your assessment is this, but this part of your assessment, we're not going to extend the tax rate to. We're going to pretend like this portion of your assessment doesn't exist, and we're only going to extend the local tax rate to this part of your assessment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, the more exemptions you have, the less of your assessed value is going to be subject to that local tax rate. So maybe you have a homeowner's exemption plus a senior exemption, plus you may have other exemptions that are on there, maybe a home improvement exemption, maybe some type of an exemption for veterans. There's at least 3 of them. Then those can add up to exempt a larger and larger percent of the overall assessed value. A reduction is what I do. That's what a lot of times you do need an attorney to make sure that you're getting the maximum amount of assessment reduction that's possible. So we make arguments based on market value and also on assessment uniformity. Any other argument we could find, sometimes property characteristics. And then the overall goal for us is to bring that total assessed value down as far as we can. And if there's something to argue about, we continue arguing about it until, there's nothing left to argue about. Until you're the lowest in the neighborhood, then we'll be satisfied. But essentially in Cook County, we're always making those arguments. All the sales that we look at, all the uniformity comps that we look at, and we go to the assessor, we go to the Board of Review, we go to the Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board, or sometimes Circuit Court, depending on what the case is. And the reduction, if you appeal in the first year of the assessment cycle, should stay in effect for the remaining years of the assessment cycle. Although there are some assessing officials who are trying to move in the direction of annual assessments, and there are arguments in favor of that are valid, and there's arguments against it that are valid as well. But in a general sense, the reduction that you obtain in the first year of the assessment cycle remains in effect for the rest of the cycle.
Okay, well, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. What impact does applying for a property tax exemption or reduction have on a homeowner's overall property taxes in Illinois?
Like I said, in Cook County, the general homestead exemption, maybe it's worth $1,000 or less, depending on what the local tax rate is. If you have the senior exemption on top of that, it may be another $700 or $800. So now it starts adding up. If you have the senior freeze, which means that you are over 65 and your total household income for anybody that lives in your house is below $65,000, then in Cook County, the minimum tax dollar value of the senior exemption is $2,000. So in addition to what you save on your general homestead exemption, in addition to what you save on your senior exemption, you would also then save $2,000 on your senior freeze. The trick with the senior freeze, though, is because it is based on annual income, it does have to be renewed annually. So the senior does have to find a way to either respond to the solicitation that they receive from the assessing official about the renewal of the exemption, or they have to just make it a habit of visiting their local township assessor once a year to bring in their data. And different township assessors have different standards in terms of what they require. Some of them really check into your income. Some of them just make you sign a form and that's it. And they don't check into anything. Some of them make you bring your social security documents, like to show what kind of payments you're getting, or some of them will want to review your tax returns even. So the senior freeze can be very meaningful. Minimum tax dollar value of $2,000.
And you said for Illinois homeowners that want to apply for property tax exemptions, they can just head down to the assessor, right? They don't need to do anything fancy
In Cook County, there is a portal on the website where you can apply for your exemption. I did this in my former house. I lived in the suburbs for like 4 years, from 2020 to 2024. I think like after I moved out, I finally got them to like, and I'm a property tax attorney and I couldn't even get them to put it on. So I was like using this portal and they have this like DocuSign thing. And finally I did what I should have done in the first place. Finally, I did what I tell all my clients to do. I went to my local township assessor in New Trier Township and I said, am I doing something wrong here? I keep filling this out and showing them a copy of my ID and my everything. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And so he looked at it from his end and he said, well, it looks like somehow this form ended up with the wrong tax year number on it. And I'm like, I wouldn't have done that. I can't imagine I would have done that. So who knows how it happened? I don't know. My advice that I give to all my clients, which I did not take myself, which I should have taken initially, was just go talk to your local township assessor if you have one. If you don't have one, then go to the county. In Cook County, that's 118 North Clark Street on the 3rd floor. And outside of Cook County, usually the local township assessors will help you. And in a lot of the counties, there's an official called a supervisor of assessments who's responsible for administering the exemptions. And those are the ones that would do the intake of your documents and make sure that you're getting screened for all the exemptions that you might qualify for.
And how can someone be best prepared before they hit that portal or going onto the assessor's office to, expedite the process?
The number one thing is when you move, change your address pretty quickly on your ID, because that is one of the things that they're going to want to see. This was trickier during the pandemic because the DMV wasn't available to people in the way that they normally were.
Sure.
So, generally the number one thing is after you move, change your address, because they are going to ask you to show them your picture ID showing the address that you want the exemption on. And then they're also going to want to see the utility bills, whatever utility bills you might have. So this can be tricky if the tax bill or the mortgage or whatever bills are in one person's name and not the other, then you might want to put in the homeowners exemption application in that person's name, so you don't run into any questions about like, well, did you really own it too? And now you're digging through your closing file and showing different types of closing documents. So number one, change your address after you move. Number two, make sure the names on the utility bills line up with the ID that you're using to prove out residency. And it should be relatively straightforward after that.
What steps should a homeowner take if they believe that they do qualify for an exemption, but they didn't receive it?
Well, there is a portal on the Cook County Assessor's website, and I tried it. I still don't think I ever got the money. And I'm a property tax attorney.
If you can't do it, what choice do we have?
But again, I should have just gone to the local township assessor. I think I resubmitted it after I spoke to the local township assessor. Hopefully it's in the works. In Cook County, you can go back 3 years. So I'm not like super animated about it yet because I know that I have time to follow up on it. Outside of Cook County, it's a much quicker window. They can only go back and give you 1 year. They call it a certificate of error. They'll give you a 1 year tax break if you qualified for it last year, but you didn't get it, they'll give you a refund in the amount of the tax savings that you would have realized if you had put the exemption in place for that tax year. In Cook County, it's 3 years, so that can add up. And, generally the CFE, according to statute, you can have it issued anytime before the tax sale. So we're, still in good shape for following up on my money. Ask me next time we have a podcast together and I'll let you know how it's going. Yeah. But again, the number one thing is please don't hire someone to do this. I mean, it does require some follow up, because if they've decided that something's deficient in your application, somehow nobody told me. In other words, that is kind of the frustrating thing, that if they would have sent me any kind of message saying, hey, did you know on this form you put in this tax year? I would have been like, no, I didn't know that. Let me resubmit it. But there was no communication.
Yeah, no one tells you anything.
Right. So I had to. So again, the local township assessor is the best resource. And going down there in person, if you live in the city of Chicago, is usually the best bet, I would say. But don't pay somebody 50%. They're not doing enough to earn that.
Good advice. For property owners or someone who might have just purchased a home, is there anything they can do to ensure they're applying for right exemptions and reductions from the start to kind of prep for it?
Certain places will prorate an exemption. So if you buy your house mid-year, they might give you half the benefit of the exemption. I think the best thing to do is change your address right away. Go talk to the township assessor as soon as you can. And what happens is if the previous owner of the property qualified for the exemption, then as long as they owned it and lived there as of January 1st, then any exemptions for which they qualified should remain in full force and effect for the entire tax year.
Okay.
And
All
so
right.
the tricky thing for closing attorneys is to really make sure that there's not going to be any surprises with any of those exemptions falling off, especially when there's a senior freeze on there. That can really result in some massive liability for the buyer's attorney. If the buyer's attorney accepts a low tax credit from the seller because the tax bill was low last year, and then those exemptions fall off and there's a big surprise after the tax bills come out, well after the closing, then, I've seen instances where the tax bill ended up being $25,000 up from, $1,400. And they didn't get anywhere near enough money from the seller to cover that tax liability. In Illinois, we pay our taxes 1 year in arrears, and we've done so ever since the Great Depression because there was a tax strike at the time. And so when you have a closing, you want to hold that money. You want to hold the worst case scenario money in escrow. And then and only then will the seller be duly motivated to help you fill out the forms that you need to fill out in order to process the certificate of error, if that makes sense. Because if you didn't hold any money back, now they live in Florida or now they're deceased and you have absolutely no mechanism to force the correct credit from the seller to the buyer in light of the fact that the taxes escalated so dramatically after the exemptions fell off.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's good advice. That's definitely a good tip. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Divine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with Nora Devine. To connect with Nora and the team, visit thedivinelawgroup.com, and please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Nora, it's always great to hear from you. Thanks so much for all the insight.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.